In 1979, Claiborne Temple was listed on the National Register of Historic Places for architectural significance and the role it played in the sanitation workers' strike of 1968. Claiborne Temple's In This Place program introduced the concept of restorative economics to Memphis. Conceived by Namwaka Agbo, it centers on the healing and restoration of vulnerable communities that have been marginalized by an extractive economy. Investing in strategies that create shared prosperity and self-determination provides a just transition for these communities to the next economy. The Center for Transforming Communities adapted the restorative economics framework to a restorative organizing framework.
For me, the narrative is about safe, loving, abundant, joyful neighborhoods for Black folks, and how that is our birthright. What we are working to do is simply restore what it is that our families have had for years and years and years, and the things that were taken from them. And so for me, that's why we brought in the work of restorative economics, because the conversation is like, our dreams that we have for our neighborhoods, the dream that Victoria has for Orange Mound, are not pipe dreams. They're not like, I can't believe, where did you come with this idea? It's like, we just want it to be the way it was when we were thriving. That's it. That's all we want.
What I see by far and large for somebody that's been in Memphis for 10 years is that there's never representation of the ordinary person in the systems. It's like the person that doesn't hold the official title, the person that, of church leader or store owner, right? But just your average resident that's living in a neighborhood that all has, to what Anasa said, dreams and aspirations. How do we create a pipeline, though, to where that actually turns into power? And specifically, I feel like the conversation that's often divorced is economics. Like, we see a lot of brick and mortar establishments across the city. And I remember when Collective transformed into Tone, when they started coming up with like conversations around how they wanted to have ownership. Like, we can't change the things that we do not own. And that at the very core part of the narrative is like, how do we seed for Black and brown communities to have ownership of the things that are happening around them?
Where you guys are doing the heavy lifting in the infrastructure side, we get to come in and I think about narratives in the sense of the stories Black people are telling. And you guys kind of paving that way for us to actively build that platform for Black artists to show up and create and tell stories about their childhood, their mama's childhood, their great-grandmama's childhood, or their future child's childhood. And like in a space where we're not borrowing space, I think to lean into what you were saying, Justin, like we can't change anything if we don't own it. And so what happens when we own our space and our folks have a chance to show up and tell their stories, and they're not tiptoeing lines of perfection like we have to do when we are borrowing space. They are instead showing up with experimentation and with innovation, and they don't have to be perfect, so they get to try and try things they've never thought or seen before.
There is a narrative also here about the power of the creative and the artist to reimagine the world from a different point of view, and that is what all of us are doing. We are telling stories to be able to help unleash imagination, but we're also infusing capital and building capital infrastructure. So my conversation is like, are the people who care about me and are going to care for me have control and power to build neighborhoods where I can be safe and I don't have to be wondering like if I have to be perfect.
And if we're gonna tell people we want them to trust us, there's an understanding that I'm gonna have to prove that we're trustworthy 10 times before they even begin to believe that that's a real thing. And so in place of that, like really giving folks the space to challenge us when we don't get it right and respond, show them how we're going to respond, and then acknowledging that it is a lifelong commitment. Like there is not a day that we wake up and we can say, wow, trust has been done. We did that, now to the next thing.
I think the core of trust is actually about self-love. I think it's about loving others. I think it's about loving as a community practice towards freedom and justice. And I think it's about love and power. Like those four things have to intersect, I think, to create trust.
I think the conversation about trust is really tricky because when we're community facing, then however much labor it is, we're willing and want to do it because we are coming with pure and open hearts with a vision that we hope is a shared vision. And we're willing to show up in a way that says like, hi, I want you to know that I love you and I'm doing this thing for us. And can you look at it and tell me if you think it's for us too? Right? And that takes like so much, not just like physical labor, but the emotional labor that's required to be able to build that kind of trust, to be able to always show up and tell the 100% truth. That's hard. And it's countercultural. That's not what Americans do. We do not connect emotionally. We do not tell the truth. We do not lean into our vulnerability.
We're told it's unprofessional.
Right, we're told it's unprofessional. It's unprofessional, right? And you better go in there and have a stone face, and you better say these talking points.
I think that in a quantitative space, because again, I go there, especially with like capital pipeline development, it's always about the quantitative analysis. That to me is it's in the show to prove, like language. And when we move to qualitative space, that's where we see more stories, but it's because the stories hold the morality in it in ways that it comes off the paper, and it doesn't come off the paper. So that's why storytelling becomes so important. How do we hold relationships and honorability where it is emotional labor that's a part of it, right? And how we lean in to build, that is what community actually is. And so often the frames only talk about the accountable part, but it doesn't talk about the person. And so therefore how the person fully shows up in Crocs and all of that is discounted to where they can't come to the table.
There's so much in me witnessing Anasa show up as Anasa, like, wow, now I'm empowered to do the same. And then that's the same for the artists that show up in our space. If the artists don't see me changing how I speak, changing what I wear, they're encouraged and empowered to show up as their authentic selves.
And the question that I think is pivotal and critical and at the core of all of the projects, right, is how are the people better off?
How?
If we don't start answering and asking.
And not just better off, but how are the people in charge? Right? Like if we're not amassing resources at scale and then putting them on the table where a whole bunch of folks that are from the neighborhood are sitting and they're saying, oh, we need to give 20 grand over here, 500 grand over here, 3 million over here, and we need a new grocery store. Like we have literally billions of dollars in development in this neighborhood, and still there's no grocery store. Who decided that? Not the person who lives over there. I know who decided it, and he don't live around here.
We have an $8 billion, for that matter, global footprint for our medical systems. And so there's opportunity, and it's adjacent. And this is not to call out, right? It is to call in. we are here wanting to support what that looks like, and how do you reimagine the lens that you see through to see us as viable partners, thought partners, decision makers, to aid you in the process that no one has ever. We've not moved the needle, Memphis. We haven't moved the needle. Yeah. So therefore, this space of innovation that we're trying to create.
It don't work. How are you grading me?
How?
Against what?
Nothing.
All the many fucking
right.
How do you know if it's successful? You've never seen it. As exceptional as we are not the exception to the rule.
Yes.
And this is just a fraction of what it looks like when people are offered up resources, offered up opportunities. And if we can get that into this abundant sea of brilliant thought leaders, and just how many of those folks can get their hands on resources and hope, that's when the stuff starts changing, not when a couple saviors come down from on high to come fix these poor black people.
We have to redefine every level of society from a place of love. And I don't mean like that squishy pink love. I mean vulnerability, accountability, togetherness, community, working hard, and all of those things, trust, all of that. I don't see any other way to do it. I don't see any other way to do it except for to do that hard work of having those conversations of like, we have to learn. Like, I know it sounds cliche and all that, but like, honestly, the only way out is through love. It's through love. And no, those are not conversations that people are comfortable having, but that's what we are.
There were folks that were so committed to this work that struggling to figure out gas, getting evicted, food insecurity. Like, there are so many of these lived day-to-day basic necessities not being met that stops us from being okay. And then you take a level above that and you're like actively fighting oppression while being oppressed, and then taking a level above that, and then think of all the ways these intersections show up for us, whether we have felony records or identifying the LGBTQ plus community, fat, all these things that are showing up. that are making that are going to make life hard regardless, and then you want to suit up to battle it every single day. And my armor, it's got chinks and it's got holes in it where I done got blown up, and it's like, how do you? There is no okay. I don't want to sit here and pretend like there is. Like, that's not real, and it feels unfair. It feels like a shitty power dynamic for me to have to tell you that I am okay, and I get massages once a week to make myself okay, because that's not real.
It brought tears to my eyes because our communities are really wounded. They are, and and how we cope with that on an individual level, like, it's going to be different.
The lack of healing that it is both on the capital steward and community steward sometimes seen as a betrayal, as a betrayal. And so, but that goes back to that cultural conversation. Like, it is, we need to develop a culture where our goal is actually healing, because we like, this mantra of like justice, 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 justice is a very shallow and painful mantra that doesn't get us really anywhere except for alive, which is a good start, right? Like, alive is a fantastic start. But it is like, I am looking for us to be working towards each other's healing and each other's joy and each other's wholeness and each other's sovereignty and each other's like vacation. You don't get wealth without ownership and governance. It's just not how. That's not how it works, right? You got to have ownership. You got to have sacred governance for the whole, and you have to have cooperative economic structure. This is not about people getting rich. This is about leveraging the richness of our collective resources so that everybody has what they need and can thrive and be joyful and happy and sad and angry and human.
And to that matter, not for them to get rich. And I don't even think it's necessarily to move the needle in terms of middle class either. Like, there are so many things that happen in working class communities. You know what I'm saying?
Middle class.
Yeah.
What does an economy of love look like? I have a friend who was a brilliant black woman from Alabama. Her name is Jessica Norwood, and she says, how do we build an economy that loves black people? That's the driving question of her work, is how do we build an economy that loves black people? Not black person, not black talented 10, not black basketball star, not black artist, but how do we love black people as a whole? And what does it look like for us to build and operate economic structures that nurture that notion? And that's what we're trying to do. That's what we are doing. That's what we spend our whole entire life doing, is loving black people and building what we know we need to thrive.